here.
And can you link me
Oh,
the actual live stream so I can put it elsewhere for people to watch?
yes. Just give me 1 second here. All right, I am back. Are you able to hear me? I'm gonna send you that. Just give me 1 second. I think I lost audio. Hey, guys, put in the chat if you can hear me. Are you able to hear me first? Because I went out to grab that link, but I posted it in the chat. I saw your mic came off for a second there. You good?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. Hey, so I posted the link in the chat. Are we lagging out? We might be lagging out. I'm gonna go out and go back in.
No, I can hear you. I was just
Oh,
muted.
okay. Okay. So we're good, right?
Yeah, I got the link
Okay.
too. I'm gonna post it in our server.
All right. Cool. All right. All right. So yeah. Again, apologies, everybody. I know this is like way late, and we tried to do this before, and we hit some snags. But I do have first on. We're gonna be discussing the Russo Ukrainian war, kind of getting some unique perspective into it, and kind of talking about how like both sides play it up to be certain things. Both sides try to use it to justify certain things, and I wanted to talk to first just because he's been really watching everything as it happens and taking both sides into consideration. I don't think I've ever seen as many like different sources posted in one place as in the Discord chat. Like you've really got sources coming from everywhere. So yeah, if you kind of want to tell us, a little bit about, I mean, you don't really need much introduction around these parts, but what your unique insight into this war is, and how things are playing out so far.
I'll start chronologically. If people want like a deeper background, that's gonna go back in more time to like the origin of Ukraine and its relation to Russia as a whole. Go check out my conversation with Lamprey Milt on Big Tao Chat channel. It's called Big Trouble in Little Russia. So there, me and Lamprey kind of talk about the beginning of this conflict and going all the way as deep as we could go in history. I'll go. I'll start with the first Donbass war, which started after the Maidan that happened in Kiev. So, how did the Donbass reaction? So, it was a counter revolution, basically. You had a revolution going on in Kiev, and then you had a counter revolution of pro Russian people in places like Kharkiv, Donetsk, Lugansk, and the whole oblasts. You had some people in Odessa, you had Crimea, and you had conflicts in all those areas, right? And
Hey,
so,
first, just for our audience who's not as familiar, oblast, that's like a province, that's like a region.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, like
state.
a
Think of it
state.
as a state of here in America. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, following Maidan, there was actually a lot of infighting between pro-Russian and pro-Maidan. And what ended up happening is once pro-Maidan protesters were finished up in Kiev and they overthrew the government there, they would send their own supporters would be motivated to go to other locations and help out their other supporters that felt outnumbered against like pro-Russian crowds. Things anyone it happens in America too. You see protests or bust from state to state. That happens here in all types of events as we've seen. So so what would happen in Crimea is there was particular fighting. There was actually like a bus burned of pro-Russian protesters. There was a lot of actually, I think 30 people actually died or got injured. I'll show you that tweet actually afterwards. People actually forgot about all the conflict that was going. So it was actually a very dangerous situation happening in Crimea. It was happening in Kharkiv. It happened in Kiev, as we saw. It happened in Donetsk, Lugansk. There were security forces there trying to stop all counter revolutions, right? They were trying to hold. And what happened, there was a man called Strelokov. And who is Strelokov? Igor Strelokov. Is he served in the Transnistria conflict that's in Moldova? There's a kind of a breakaway region that's pro-Russian there on the east.
That's
So he
that
was there
little
first.
tiny sliver between
Yeah, yeah.
Ukraine and Moldova, right?
So yeah, so Strelokov was this figure. He was there, and then he was also in Chechnya, I think, and other conflicts that happened within Russia. And he was basically in the military intelligence. He was actually in the military proper, and he retired actually in 2013. And in 20 after 2013, he worked in Crimea, and he worked for like the internal security state, and he would track like threats in Crimea, right? And that was because Russia actually had a huge military presence, had leased that area, so he was under Russia, but he was stationed in Ukraine. And what he did when Maidan broke out is he crossed from Crimea into Ukraine proper at the time when there was chaos in Crimea, and actually it successfully went under Russian control, and there was a referendum. He went into Donetsk Oblast, and he took about like 60 people. He met with 60 people on the Ukraine side, or former Ukrainian citizens who wanted to like help the pro-Russian side in a more militaristic way. Because what they saw coming is Kiev, the Maidan government, is going to arm up, and they're going to actually, and then we're doing that. They're on the way to secure the situation, right, to hold the country together, in their perspective. And so he went to a city called Slavyansk, which is actually important because it's on the front lines now. And he went in there with about 60 men, 64 men, I think. And you can look this up in a book called 85 Days in Slavyansk. I think that's the title. It was translated by Nemitz, a prominent, like, slightly pro-Russian figure on Twitter. A lot of people have like a lot of respect for him because he digs really deep into history of the kind of Russian post and Soviet area, and all the all the tribes and everything that were around that area for going back 10,000 years. So he forms up. What he does is he takes over a police station, and then he meets with all the locals and says, "Hey, I'm an official representative with the Kremlin. Don't worry, the Russian military will come and it will help us out, right? It will help us. We can take this and we'll become part of Russia." And there's speculation, right? Did he actually have these orders? Because officially, and he got reprimanded for this, he officially broke orders. He left his post. He actually, what Russia told us, do not cross. If you're working for us, do not cross into Ukraine proper. We do not want an escalation. But he did not listen to those orders. He went by himself, and maybe he believed, because he does have actual political connections inside of Russia. Maybe he did believe when he was in Slavyansk and he took over the police HQ that he would have backup. He would have, people might have told him, "Oh yeah, I'm a lieutenant colonel, and we got you, bro. We'll on our way." Rumors do spread like that all the time, as we see in this war. And so he told the population, hold with me. And his 64 troops motivated about another 1,000 to 2,000, right, during the time. And eventually, the Ukrainian military made its way, and they basically said, "Hey, you guys are separatists. You guys need to lay your arms down, and if not, we're going to fight." And so they fought, right? And about at the conclusion of the battle, there was about 10,000 Ukrainian troops facing off about Strelikov's 1,000 to 2,000 max men, right? So it was kind of like a siege. The thing with Strelikov is because he had a lot of previous experience and he had a lot of veterans, like post-Soviet veterans, veterans of Soviet wars and post-Soviet wars on his side. They were able to stage like a very, very good defense of the city. Like they were able to bring like 11 helicopters down of the Ukraine side, multiple tanks, and they didn't have a lot of equipment. They had like one mortar. They had some armored cars. Because what was going on also, how did he get this equipment? You can go on Vice News And Vice News, they have an episode on the Ukraine crisis in 2014, and it shows Ukraine, a lot of National Guard of Ukraine handing over their equipment to the pro-Russian side, and a lot of those soldiers switching sides because they're from those areas and they have sympathy for the locals. So that if you want to see that in action, go to Vice News. It's a series called Russian Roulette. There's an episode in 2014 about showing how they're handing off BMPs, BTRs, their AKs, rocket launchers. So you got some of that equipment, and it went into Slavyansk, and he held for about 2 months until the Ukrainians started encircling. And what eventually happened, the city did get an operational encirclement, and he had to break out. And he actually was able to break out. There's a also Vice News shows this. There's a show like one of those handed over BMPs getting destroyed, like it's on the side of the road when they tried to do a breakout, but they weren't, and they fled to like the Donetsk proper, and he got elected. By the time he did that, there was already a Donetsk People's Republic, a Lugansk People's Republic, and a Kharkov People's Republic in the works. Um, and he became the first defense minister of the Donetsk People's Republic, and he started fighting. What the Ukrainian Maidan government said is, what you guys are doing now, that you have armed resistance, you guys are terrorists. So we're going to call it an anti-terrorist operation. We're not going to call it a war. It's an anti-terrorist operation. And so they went in. They went in to fight Strelokov, and there was another figure called Moscovoy. He was a kind of like a communist figure, and he held on to Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and Lysychansk.
And this is
So
where we're still talking 2014 at this point.
yes, no, in 2014, yeah. So there was all these figures, some of them coming from Russia, some of them coming from within Ukraine, and they were helping out stage an actual rebellion, stage an actual republic, and counter the Maidan forces. And so actual fighting broke out majorly. The Ukrainian forces, Donetsk and Lugansk, they were like kind of strongholds of these pro-Russian movements, and they were getting volunteers from Russia, and they were getting equipment sent to them, like the light stuff that you could donate, like body armor, drones, whatever, some weapons. And they were basically holding off the Ukrainian military. And Sherlockov, this is the first issue he has, is by now, it's 2 months in, past 2 months, he lost Slavyansk, he retreated out of there. The Ukrainian military is approaching. It's taken over. It's taking territory back steadily from pro-Russian protesters and pro-Russian people, and he feels kind of betrayed by the Kremlin because he, at least, I don't know who his contacts were, and nobody, and he probably keeps it secret for a reason. Is there was no Russian army coming. They didn't choose. They didn't choose to go in like Crimea for some reason, right? And he felt betrayed, but he still kept fighting. But he, at that point, became an anti-Kremlin figure. He started blaming everything on them. He's saying like, you guys are leaving Russian people behind, and he felt on his own at that point.
What's strange is this all like really started boiling over in 2014, and I watched that Donbass video that you'd sent me, right, which was pretty eye-opening to me because it's stuff you're not going to see here in Western media. For example, you had the I believe it was the former president of Ukraine, Petro
Poroshenko.
Poroshenko, who said he was talking about how Russian children are, what did he say, they're beasts, they should sleep in the cellar or something to that effect. And it's like, okay, like like the whole time, I mean, I knew, like, obviously, like, Ukraine was no angel, like there clearly was a reason that there was tension between the two. But what kind of, like, I guess what I wanted to ask you is, Ukraine gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1994, correct?
Yeah, and there was actual multiple referendums. Like Crimea actually had a referendum. Like some parts of Ukraine wanted to stay with the Soviet Union proper, and some places wanted to be. It was a mixed bag. So, but eventually, because there was no military tension, there was no political tension within Ukraine or Russia at all at this point in 1984. So it was a very clean split with the expectation they would actually be like cooperative nations, right? They would have the SEO, they would have economic cooperation, they would be like attached limb to limb, right? So
Yeah.
there was no violent context back then. There has always been an anti-Russian movement in Western Ukraine, going back a long time because of Austrian influence, and that's why I talk about the show I did with Lamprey. Um, and that's kind of like coming from Galatians. Galatians, they never were fully kind of loyal. They're actually a different culture and even language from Ukraine proper.
I wanna see what you think of this comment here. This is from Jeremiah Humans. He's a YouTuber who knows you pretty well. He says Putin is trying to take Ukraine intact, wants to replace the leader with his own. He wants that pipeline. I know that's a little off topic, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think we actually that's not, I haven't seen that as a state of goals. Actually, right now, Russia pays money to Ukraine every month to send money through its gas pipeline to Europe. So, and I haven't seen them make any efforts or any mention of um, doing anything with the gas pipeline, right? So,
Right.
and
Because like,
I would actually ask that we hold the comments like till the end,
yeah,
because
why
we
don't
got we
we?
got the
I was gonna say I don't know if we'll do guests tonight. We, like I said, there's probably going to be a part two at some point. So
yeah, we should do a part two.
why don't we do this? We'll do guys, save your questions for the end, and we'll address them then. But yeah, I'm gonna let you continue. I did have something I wanted to ask on that point though. So you said at that point there was no violence or tension between the two nations. Why do you think it took so long for it to boil over? Why is it all culminating, in recent years? Because 1994 through 2014, right? We're talking a 20-year gap.
Because I think it goes to just the argument of people's living conditions, right? Because the Soviet Union, when it fell apart, Europe kept industrializing, it kept growing its living standards, and part of Ukrainians see this, and they're asking their government, why is this not happening to us? Why is there nothing new being built? Why do we not have? Because people, once that the Iron Curtain's down, there's people traveling outside the West. They're seeing what West looks like. They're seeing what people have access to. And Russia, in the 90s, Russia was chaotic. Well, so was Ukraine.
Yeah,
And
they basically
yeah,
the collapse of the Soviet Union was really not good for. We weren't ready for it either.
yeah. No, we had no intelligence. We thought the CIA even was surprised by it, right? So even Putin talks about, he kept a gun, he worked as a cab driver, it was really bad, and that is all true. I mean, I was a kid in the late 90s, at least in Russia, and I remember it being pretty gloomy, nothing like it is now, night and day at this point. But the thing is people say that's only Russia in the 90s. But do you know who was even more chaotic because it had less of a strong central state? Ukraine. Ukraine. So when Russia would actually push out certain agitators, like they really made an effort to push back any like groups that were a threat to the central government, like actually neo-Nazi groups, because that's actually a big threat to Russia. And so a lot of these neo-Nazi groups that went from Russia into Ukraine, or criminal groups, right? They said, hey, the central authorities taking back control. The police are getting stronger. We're gonna go into an area where we can operate that has a weaker control. So Ukraine was actually facing arguably a much worse crisis internally than Russia, right?
Was there like big crime syndicates in Ukraine, kind of like how like
Yes.
the Italians
Yes.
have La Cosa Nostra, Japan has
Yeah.
the Yakuza. Like, what's the Ukrainian equivalent to that?
Ukrainian, it'd be very similar to the Russian groups. I don't know what the gang names are or anything. This crime actually persists to this day. I can give an example like later on as we go through the chronological of how it actually persists during the Maidan Revolution, post Maidan.
And did they
Um,
have like the level of influence that like say that like the Italian mafia had over New York City in like the 60s and 70s?
I I'd say arguably yes, because with a weak central government, that's what you have. Those type of groups, they take control, and that's why we see a Maidan Revolution is because of a weak central state relative. to other places. You have what you have is far right groups. You have far left groups who are nostalgic for the Soviet Union, and you have far right groups that are nostalgic for a more fascist state. That like you have many people who served on the German side of the World War II, right? They have many ancestors who did that, who made that choice to go against the Soviet Union, and they still see that the Soviet Union as a big, big problem for their livelihoods, and they see it as a big injustice that their lands were actually under the Soviet Union. Because going back to the 19, as soon as World War II ended, actually there was still insurgencies going on in the West in Galicia proper, which is Western Ukraine today, and it was helped by the Americans. There was actual fighting. It wasn't huge, but it was a legitimate insurgency, right? There was Red Army troops fighting them. There was guerrillas hiding in the forests. So there's always that tension there, right?
There seems
And
to have been throughout the history, right, of Russia, Soviet Union, and I guess you could call them the quote unquote like satellite states, right? There seems to be always some type of infighting. Not that we don't have our own like infighting, but that seems to be like the at least the way it was presented to us. Is that accurate?
yeah, I would just say that it was in Russia, and then Russia started stabilizing because they always inherited a stronger central state than Ukraine, because again, it's Moscow, it's the more of the heartland. They have more stability. They're going to be able to mobilize faster, all their law enforcement and everything, and fight all the mafia groups, and at least reduce that. And Ukraine took a longer time doing that. Not that they also climbed out of the 90s crisis, but it wasn't as good. And then you had things like the Orange Revolution. You had people saying, why are the conditions so bad? Can we not catch up to Europe? Why are we still stuck in the Soviet state? Like these legitimate concerns, right? Because number one thing that sways people is not ideology and experience. Or ideology or what they think. It's just their living standards, right? If there's a central authority and your living standards continue to fall or they stagnate, people are gonna have a problem regardless of what they think
Yeah,
they are.
they're gonna
Yeah.
crucify their own government. That's how it
Yes.
always.
Yeah.
That's how it always goes.
Yeah. So yeah. But if I answer that question sufficiently, going back to Strelikov in 2014, post Slavyansk, is he started commanding Donetsk People's Republic militias. There's militias that worked independently of him. And remember, there's already a military structure to this because a lot of these people are former National Guard or army units, or they're the police, the Berkut. They were the security forces in Kiev. A lot of them, they're like, hey, we got our asses kicked in Kiev, and we didn't get support from the government. This is screwed, and we saw pro sentiments of the old government. So we're gonna go to the east and fight, right? Because all of a sudden it's like the Iraq issue with ISIS and with the insurgency groups is you destroyed Saddam's army, but all these people used to draw a paycheck, and all of a sudden now they don't draw a paycheck. They don't draw any social status. They don't draw any importance. It's gone. So what are all these unemployed men going to do that used to have this status and money coming in? And that's what happened to Berkut, and that's what happened to a lot of the Ukrainian military post Maidan. And that's why there was such an effective fighting force under Sarlikov, and it knew who was fighting. It was really fighting itself with the help of pro-Russian volunteers. And what happened is there was initially the Ukrainians after Slavyansk, they kept what they wanted to do. And there's good evidence to say that at this point, America was already involved in the combat. It was already advising the Ukrainians on how to stop the flow of volunteers and equipment from Russia, and they were going to cut it off. And actually, that's what happened. Is the Donetsk People's Republic? It was under threat of it was getting cut off in the Torres region. Um, the main highway between Russia and Donetsk and also Lugansk was getting cut off, and that was the major threat. But at that point, the Ukrainian military overstretched itself, and it allowed itself to get in multiple encirclements. If you follow the battle maps, you see that sometimes the Ukrainians get encircled the pro-Russians, like in Slavyansk, and sometimes it happens to them. But what happened is they kept getting encircled and encircled because they made a very strategic move of cutting off these regions from Russia proper and cutting it off from themselves. But in turn, that was their greatest mistake because, like Strelikov and Mozgovoi, they were able to encircle and fight kind of like a semi-guerrilla war, ambushing columns, ambushing these patrols, ambushing these tanks that were rolling in. And so there was many key battles, like we talked about Slaviansk, but there was a big battle in Donetsk port, which was probably some of the heaviest casualties. And you can see Vice News. Vice News is actually really pro-Western, especially now. But they'll show you they were at that airport, and they'll show you the fighting. And eventually, the pro-Russians won it, and the pro-Russians actually found Western gear. They found three which basically counter battery mortar from America, and it's listed on Wikipedia. You can see pictures of it. So at this time, Ukraine, and there was some actual M4 rifles, but they're not that. I mean, it doesn't make that much of a difference. So there was already American assistance coming into this country at this point, and there was American help because Maidan, if you look at the post-Maidan figures who entered the government, a lot of them were American citizens. They weren't even Ukrainians. They
Did
were inputted there.
did the Cold War ever in Russia anyway? Did the Cold War ever really end? Because I know obviously, like, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. You had all these former Soviet states now setting up their own government, which I can imagine was actually probably a lot of them weren't ready for too. I think there's a hilarious video somewhere. It's called like the day that Kazakhstan was the entire Soviet Union for a day. And like there were all these memes like, I'm something of a USSR myself and like all that BS. But like in Russia, was there in the 90s? You said you'd got to experience that in the late 90s. Was there still like anti like Western or anti American sentiment there?
So there was a conflict within Russia itself that there was the neoliberal order said, hey, because remember, people like Putin and I'm blanking on the name of the first president because
Yeltsin.
Yeah, Yeltsin, a drunk. So Yeltsin was actually Bill Clinton actually admitted, and his whole cabinet said, "Hey, we helped Yeltsin get in power." And they met with Bill Clinton, they met with the United States. It was kind of almost like Maidan when the Soviet Union collapsed,
Yeah, the
because
tanks rolling up on the Kremlin,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
remember like
and they fired, yeah, yeah,
they're just
because yeah,
driving down the street like it's nothing. Yeah.
yeah, and they were firing into government buildings within Russia. Basically, Yeltsin was firing at his own deputies and all these people who wanted to make his power illegitimate. So that proves to you there was actual conflict, and the conflict is between. It's actually like three-sided because it's pro-Western neoliberal, it's Russian nationalists who don't like the Soviet Union, and it's Soviet nostalgics who want the Soviet Union. They want to retain as much of the Soviet Union as possible. So it's actually very conflicted. And that's why you do have tanks firing on government buildings. You don't see that in America, do you? You don't. So it's very
No,
chaotic
not
situation.
since
Yeah.
we did that. I mean, we did that almost 200 years ago now.
Right.
So, I mean, we did we I mean, it's not something we've never done. Um
Yeah.
I mean, obviously tanks didn't exist then, but like we've definitely like shot at each other, and we had our moment where our political parties became just too polarized that, it basically came down to, hey, negotiations are going to fail. It's going to eventually come down to violence. But I do remember learning in school that Gorbachev was an extremely polarizing figure. Like some people
Yes.
loved him, some people thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. He's, the guy who brought us Pizza Hut and shit, and then other people were like,
Yeah.
it's his fucking fault that like the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union was the greatest achievement of human history, and it's his fault that it's ruined now. And
Yeah. Yeah. Very polarizing figure. But that was a two-way polarization. That was more like progressives versus like hardcore, you know, the Soviet, like keeping things, as the original revolution intended it to be, keeping it in that spirit. Even by then, it's funny because it's diluted, right? We're not in Stalinism, we're not in Leninism anymore. Things have morphed with time.
I just gotta read the Berlin Wall was made out of pizza boxes.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
So yeah, going back to Strelokov, Moscow, and the pro-Russian fighting. At this point in 2014 to 2015, the war had gone, hot. It was a hot war. Hundreds dead per week on each side, And you had, I mean, jetliners going down. You had these international conflicts. You had mortar shells being hit, Russian villages being hit, and then Russia responding with artillery strikes back into Ukraine every time they did that. And then you had a porous border. Who knows coming through this? So very unstable security situation. Two newly formed states, and a third one that failed to form. I'd say even a fourth one. And you have heavy fighting. And even in Mariupol, there was British journalists on the ground, and there was people trying to do a referendum. And there's a video I can send to you. And basically, the security forces roll into the city, and they started shooting warning shots at people, like, "Hey, you're not gonna assemble here. You're not gonna cause this nuisance to us. You're not gonna separate. You're not gonna be a separatist." Because the citizens there, they made several blockades that the Ukrainian military went through. So they didn't want the same thing happening that Donetsk and Lugansk happened to Mariupol. So that's what happened in Mariupol back then, and so you have fighting, you have multiple encirclements. That's how most of the casualties were caused on each side is encirclements, right? Because Strelokov experienced one by the Ukrainian military when he was clearly outnumbered in Slavyansk, and then he started doing the same thing. These Soviet tactics of encirclement, we hear about the cartels, and eventually, what happened? You had the Battle of Donetsk Airport, which was won by the pro-Russian side eventually, um, and good footage of it from Vice News. And there was other encirclements that the Ukrainian military got caught in. There were supposed green corridors, but when they went through the green corridors to escape, they still got shelled because the pro-Russian side argues, "Well, you're trying to retreat with like heavy equipment, and we won't let you do that." And then Vice News can show you a video of a destroyed Ukrainian column, which is pretty brutal. Like there's soldiers they got blown out of their vehicle and they're hanging out like on power lines. So it's like at that point, it's like, yeah, dude, the war is getting crazy. So eventually, it's 2015. Poroshenko has mobilized most of his military to fight the pro-Russian sources.
How I want to backtrack on that 1 second. So you said Poroshenko has mobilized most of his military.
Yeah,
Poroshenko often credits himself with building Ukraine's military. How truthful is that? Because I was looking at some numbers, right? That on February 22nd, 2022, Ukraine had a military of roughly 250,000 troops, and I believe the Russian military was like 950,000 troops. But before that, Poroshenko, is on the news saying that, like, oh, after 2014, I took great initiative to build a military. How true is that? What's really the history of Ukraine's military?
it's partially true. The truth of Ukraine's military is it's a mixed bag. It has some forces that are very professional, like the ones that fought in the Donetsk airport, which were like airborne troops. And there was multiple battles in the Donetsk airport, and some of the most professional troops, when the pro-Russians went in, all of a sudden Ukrainian helicopters came in with airborne forces, and they kicked the pro-Russians out, and the pro-Russians took heavy casualties. The first battle, and that's also shown on Vice News and other places. So actually, it was a mixed bag because some of them would train with Russians, and some of them you would use the same specialized equipment as Russian special forces, and they would like the VSS sniper rifle, for example. So it's a mixed bag. Some forces are under equipped, some forces are up to like Russian special forces standards, which is the highest tier in Russia. So
That is
that
that is consistent with things that I'd heard. I there's a YouTuber. I don't know if you've heard of him, Speak the Truth, and he's has interviewed people who actually went over there to fight, and he interviewed a former American Marine who went in there to fight, I guess, as a foreign legion and provide training, and he said that he worked with some units where they had absolutely no idea what they were doing. They had no idea about maneuvers or basic tactics, and he works with others who, like, he's like, well, these guys have actually had some training, so that's actually
yeah,
spot on with things that I'd heard too.
yeah. It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, and that's the thing. is the pro-Russians were a mixed bag. You had people who were like called coal miner, you had coal miner militias, and you had like Strelikov, who's like this GRU specialist, and he knows how to command people in the field. He's a very good tactician, practiced all the time, even when he was retired and all this stuff. And you have like ex special forces, so it is a mixed bag army, two mixed bag army. You can't say one was more professional than the other. It was really besides the Ukrainians had a lot more numbers, but they weren't doing a guerrilla war. A guerrilla war was waged on them, so it's harder. Of course, you're gonna take more casualties. You're gonna lose more equipment doing that. You're gonna get equipment captured because that's guerrilla war, right? It's tough to fight it.
That
So
I
that's
mean
the
that
thing.
I think that's a thing that like the Soviet Union has kind of been known for Russia in general, right? Like known for its guerrilla war. Like they will Russia throughout its existence, I would say, like a complete defensive powerhouse. Like every time, like people try, I think the last people to actually successfully like invade parts of Russia proper goes as far back as like the Mongols or something like that. Like we're talking, like centuries and centuries ago. Um, but it's always been like like in World War II, for example, they had like by far the most casualties, but they still won, like because they were able to just win out attrit the enemy, just keep taking it until eventually they run out of gas. Like
Yeah, the defense in depth and all these strategies. Yeah. There's and that's what the pro-Russian side had to its advantage multiple times is they eventually stopped launching offensives, or there was some, but most of the time they were on a defensive posture. And the Soviet military, what it does, what's is like, hey, you see Russia doing this in the current conflict. Let's pull back and just we're going to cause a really high a positive. Casualty ratio in our favor on the enemy. That's basically the goal. Where offensives are costly and defensives are either opportunistic if you can pull it off and you can hold the line. So that's what was going on in Ukraine. And so by 2015, Poroshenko he does the ATO. Some foreign assistance starts arriving. There's and Poroshenko, he's partially true. Yeah, because he in that speech, it shows like, hey, we're giving every dead soldier, we're giving so many grivas, which is the Ukrainian currency. We're giving lots of money for people to go fight in the front. It actually in the destroyed economy of Ukraine. All of a sudden, if you look even now, relative to like an average, actually before this conflict started, the Ukrainian military, Binkov battleground, he talked about this, is if you look at their wages to enter the military, it's right in the middle of society's earning, and the Russian one is actually slight to the left of the curve, so slightly less. So it's really actually good to go in the military. And when a lot of them get captured, they say, "Hey, I was a cashier at this place. I didn't make money for my family, and this was a good opportunity. I had to do it." So that's the thing is Poroshenko. He started paying the military a lot more, and also why I say partially is because there was like Kolomoisky, who was a Israeli Ukrainian oligarch, which means he just has a lot of money, a lot of business in Ukraine. He has a dual passport, and he basically financed two huge groupings, 20,000, ADAR one and ADAR two. They were some of the first units to fight, and they were some of the units to take the most casualties. They were basically unofficial. They were not strictly part of the military, but they were adjacent to the military. And so that's the thing is, it's not only the Ukrainian military fighting. It's you have Azov, you have Adar, you have all these Donbass, you have all these like nationalist groups, and you
more
have
so insurgents than a professional military then.
yeah, yeah.
Because like that was
Uh,
kind of like what we had Afghanistan, right? Like yeah, some of it was Taliban. You had like the Hezbollah, like all kinds of different denominations, but
and even Iraq, you
yeah,
had students from uh,
Sunnis, yeah.
yeah, you had students from Lebanon coming and picking up an AK with no military experience, trying to fight off the Americans. They're coming from all the way to Lebanon through Syria. So that's the thing is, yeah, you have it's not only Poroshenko. There's people who want to take charge of Ukraine. They see an opportunity. The central power is gone. There's a Maidan government. It's weak. It's being inserted by Western politicians. And there's these oligarchs that say, hey, before we were restricted because there was strong central state. Now I can gobble up all this property. And you do see this. Actually, what Kolomoisky did is he went to Kiev and he started taking like properties of Poroshenko. He started like putting gates on them and started like taking them over with his private army, Adar. There's actually videos of this. And later on, Zelensky, he what happened to Poroshenko is that he actually got like there was actually treason filed against him. So there's all these conflicts, right? But yeah, is so what happens? What's like the key moment to end this fighting is the Battle of Devastavo. And Devastavo, it's in the Donetsk Oblast, and it's about like northeast of Donetsk, and it's an important like railway hub. It's an important transit hub. You basically, if you want to control the area, you need it logistically over there, and that's what the Ukrainians had done. They actually that's where a lot of their ammunition was, a lot of their equipment, and that's where they were stationed to do attacks into Donetsk and try to cut it off from Russia, and try to cut it off from Lugansk People's Republic. And eventually, what happened is they got encircled there, and eventually a deal was brokered for. You can see this on RT, and you see this on Vice. You see them basically, and you saw there was actually like an American crew. I think CNN or NBC. There's a video of them. It has like 10 million views. They're embedded with pro-Russian militia, and they're like fighting. Like the fighting is really heavy. It's like house to house, and they're like fighting the Ukrainians. It's in the snow. And Ukrainians are withered down at this point. They have really low morale. A lot of them come from different areas. They come from Western Ukraine or Central Ukraine. They're like, hey, why are we fighting these insurgents? A lot of them. There's a lot of questions. If they want to split apart so bad, just let them. It depends. Not all soldiers are low morale, especially the nationalist group. National groups have very high morale.
I
They have
think you're going
high.
to have that on both sides, honestly. You're going to have the
Yeah.
people who don't want to be there at all, and you're going to have the people who think this is stupid and I just got, like, roped into this. And then you're going to have the people who are really gung ho on both sides who are, the
Yeah.
bottom line is, I mean, we talk about, like, yeah, like we left kind of like the black pill stuff behind, but they might be in a situation where they're kind of being used as cannon fodder on both sides. But
Yeah.
but that's the thing. So, like, obviously, like, as I've said, right, our Western media paints Ukrainians out to be like perfect angels, which we know obviously, like, it's a complex issue, right? If anybody's right, um, and again, right, like we're one to talk because we've done things for thinly veiled imperialistic reasons, right? Like Iraq, obviously, like even back then, I was saying, like, this is not a justified thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, Saddam's a dictator, but you take out him, you have to take
And
out every
false
dictator.
pretenses. Where the WMDs that were supposedly, where were those?
Yeah, and it
Those were
all
never
turned out
found.
to be, it was all basically Bush Jr. had a vendetta with Saddam because
Mm.
Saddam tried to
Dick
assassinate
Cheney
his daddy.
also. Yeah.
So they were like, they just used that as justification, like, but it was thinly veiled. I mean,
Yeah.
most people saw that. So, um, but like it's like I want to talk about, like, the history of Russia, and that because they the West often brings up Chechnya in '94 and '96 because Russia went into Chechnya in '94, was defeated, and then came back 2 years later, and was successful, and then we had Georgia in 2008, and then they got involved in the Syrian civil war in 2015. So do you think that the same way we do things for thinly veiled reasons like that, is that what was the reasoning for those conflicts, Chechnya, Georgia, and Syria?
Honestly, they're not black and white. Like I can't say that America is totally unjustified with like 100%. Like it's a sliding scale, right? How
Sure,
justified are you? I would say they're very complex, and you would have to do a show on each one. Like
sure. I would
if
say,
I yeah if
uh,
I was to like go into them, um like we would never go back to Ukraine in like the time we have left
so
because they
not
are
not
very
some not
complicated.
something we can talk about, like, in a few minutes. It's a
They're not
Okay.
easily generalizable. I
I
can't
got I
like
gotcha.
I have to explain. I have to explain like the motivations of each side, not just like, well, you have to explain why are people fighting against you. right?
Right,
What are their
of
motivations?
course.
Yeah.
I would
So
say we were not at all justified for Iraq, but Afghanistan, there was an attack on our soil, so sure. I mean, it was a response to it. Now it's like, who are we fighting in Afghanistan? Like, yeah, okay, the Taliban, but how much of the country actually wants the Taliban there? And why did we hit civilian infrastructure to take out the Taliban? Like, there's a whole, you go down that whole ethics molehill, I guess.
yeah, and in the end, unfortunately, ethic arguments don't work. What works is, can you conduct this military operation? Can you be successful? Can you win territory? You know, it's like the Nazis back in the day. They had their own ideology, which they thought they were correct for, and many people believed in them. Many people supported them. You know, many people, millions were willing to die for that. And then the Soviets, they had their own thing. And in the end, these ideologies didn't have like a debate, right? It was a war of total destruction, right? So in the end, it's unfortunately it's like whoever's the strongest is just gonna outmuscle the other guy, and that's gonna be the ideology. Like unfortunately, in this world, ethics like they don't matter much. There's not much justice sometimes, as we
No,
see.
it doesn't. But winning people over to your side certainly does, because sometimes the little guy can quickly become the
Yes, they
person who
can.
outmuscles the other person if you're
Yeah,
able to sway people to enough people to the other side.
yeah, very very important what you mentioned there. It's a huge effect, and it can uh it can make up for the juxtaposition between a small power and a big power very very effectively. But so going back to Battle of the Bustavo in 2015, is there becomes a circlement there, and this war wasn't a war of total destruction. The Ukrainian side and the pro-Russian side constantly had communications because a lot of them served. They used to be part of one military, a lot of them. So they always had communication. It wasn't a fight to like killing the last person. A lot of times, like there was encirclements, and they would negotiate their way out, and there was a green corridor. Sometimes that it would get attacked due to bad communication, or hey, actually, you're not allowed to take that, and no, I am because I'm quality. This is valid. So you have all these issues, but in the end, uh, Devastavo, they get encircled. It's cold part of the year. It's actually pretty nasty. And the Ukrainians, due to low morale, previous defeats, and not an effective mobilization, they withdraw, and then the Minsk agreements are signed. And since then, there is constant shelling between both sides. Um, of course, who has the artillery advantage? It's the Ukrainians. If you look at like how much artillery Ukraine inherited from the Soviet Union, with some units like the Gvozdika, I may, it's actually they inherited like more units than even Russia proper, and Russia's actually a bigger country. So per capita, they had a lot of artillery. So that's the thing. There was this artillery. Uh, like that's the thing. If there's an artillery duel, Ukraine's going to be able to fire like 7 batteries, and the next these militias are able to fire like one. So that even though that seems like, hey, it's equal because we both return fire on each other. Well, it's
No,
actually there.
well, that's a good example of that actually was when eh, so Russia had been saying, and Zelensky even cop too, that during certain battles, yeah, Ukraine was losing up to 200, 300 men a day. And that was specifically the Battle of Severodonetsk and the Battle of Lysychansk. Ukraine, for whatever reason, the Russian artillery just had a lot more range in that particular scenario, and that led to them getting encircled from 3 sides and having to retreat across the river. And after 3 weeks, I mean, they had tens of thousands of casualties there. That was probably like the worst. Like that was a major defeat for the Ukrainian military in this war. But they said artillery was really, that's why they were like they were like begging us for better artillery like every day during that whole episode.
Yeah, it's a huge factor throughout all these wars. So after 2015 about Levestavo, like the hot war kind of died down. So what happened is there's still the ATO, and Poroshenko's still in power. And what they're doing is they're rotating troops into the ATO, so into all these lines with the rebels, light engagements, slight skirmishes, but nothing major. And See, the problem is when the militia, pro-Russian militia, it shells into an open field where the Ukrainians, it's a military thing. When the Ukrainians respond, or if the Ukrainians shell, they're going to shell into like the nets proper because that's where the front line is. Like, where else are you going to shell most of the time? So that causes a lot of collateral issues, and that's why you see in the UN, you do see a disparity of more people, more civilians at least, dying in the inside of the pro-Russian areas. So what happens is, but it's not as major as it was in 2014, 2015, because that was a legitimate hot war with tanks moving around, thousands of troops moving around on each side. But what happens at this time is the Ukrainians go back to the drawing board and they have NATO assistance now. And they say, and they're like, looking, how can we develop a better military to eventually take this territory back, to avenge our old defeats and to take this area, including Crimea, back into Ukrainian hands, because only the military solution seems like the realistic solution here. So NATO actually, Ukrainian troops start like brigades and brigades. They start going into NATO countries, training with them, learning the NATO way to fight, the NATO structure, going away from like Soviet methods, and kind of integrating more and more Western equipment. And what's happening at the same time is these troops are actually getting combat experience. So by the end of Battle de Bastavo, there was hundreds of thousands, no, tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops that had at least some combat experience, because they were either on the front line somewhere, they were part of the logistics effort, they were part of the medical staff treating wounded, right? It's gaining experience with a peer to peer, which is very important. And are also cycling troops into this ATO zone, anti-terrorist operation zone, which is in the front line with rebels, and are constantly rotating troops in and out of there. And these troops get into engagement, sometimes deliberately, right? So, like, hey, an artillery unit will engage separatists, and then the separatists will engage back. So they're like, so they're training. So they're training how, because here's the most important training. And NATO actually has trouble with this, is how do we simulate, like, we can simulate firing downrange all the time. That's easy. You just get the shells and you fire at a particular target out on the, like we do this in
Yeah, but nobody's
uh,
firing back, and that's why
right, right.
there's no better teacher than experience.
Yes. Like 29 Palms, we have a huge in California. Like there's always like different units cycling there and they're firing down these large ranges. But there's been a problem in all militaries, and but NATO's like trying to figure out like how do we like train our crews. And there's actually, this training happens, but it's very rare because you have to have certain munitions, you have to have like certain games that be played, so you have to have a lot of staff available for this. It has to be multi-day in the field, so it's hard to do. But the Ukrainians, they're having this done by happenstance. They know their artillery crews are their infantry, their artillery crews, all the nationalist battalions. They're learning what it is to be under fire, right? They know, and that's the most important thing. Is when your troops are fresh and green, sure, they had a lot of training like firing on targets, but are they trained enough to, when they get hit, when their tanks are getting hit, when their position starts getting hit, when their battery starts getting hit, do they know not to panic? Do they know how under stress and under pressure to keep fighting and keep adjusting the artillery, right? And that's what the Ukrainians are learning as they're cycling troops in and out between like 2015 and 2022, is they keep cycling, and sometimes they intentionally lob shells so they can get that training, or someone does it out of command when they're not supposed to, and does it deliberately. It was actually getting bad that Zelensky, I don't know if you've seen this video, he went to the front line and he went to talk to some Azov guys, and he got in big arguments. There's a video of him talking to like a sergeant, and the sergeant's actually like, imagine if like our president went down to like Afghanistan and he started arguing with like a staff sergeant or something. And he's like,
Oh
he's like,
my
hey,
god!
yeah, we're leaving Afghanistan. Leave your position. The guy says, no, I don't think we should, and I have these orders, and yeah, Zelensky's getting in a real tough. Like he's getting very frustrated with this guy. And he's like, give me the names of the people out here. Give me the names or the people that are telling you to stay here. There's like civilians coming out and they're saying their own story. It's pretty intense. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's very interesting video. So Zelensky was having trouble like negotiating with parts of the military and parts of these militias, which are huge. These pro. Some of them are far right. Some of them are like nationalistic. It's a mixed bag. Since they have a lot of incentive, they have a lot of morale. They want to stay on the front lines. They don't want to like pack up and leave. They don't want to reduce their amount of troops there, even though whatever Zelensky thinks. So it shows that he doesn't have all the power here. You know, if the sergeant's talking back to you, that's not fucking good, and that shows how committed.
I couldn't imagine like like a sergeant talking back
You
to
know,
questioning any of our presidents,
yeah.
right? Like that would never.
Remind me after the show to send that to you because I think everyone has to watch it to
Yeah,
understand
I
what
like. There's
you know.
actual video footage of him getting into
Yeah,
it with
yeah,
this guy.
because he takes like Zelensky invites his like own like news team there because he wants to show the population like hey, I'm trying to like calm the situation down and everything, and there was these promises that we're gonna stop, but then Zelensky said something different afterwards. He's like, hey, actually, no, we're not gonna make peace with these people. We want to take every territory back. And you have to ask, was he influenced once he saw on the front line that, hey, I can't even convince these people to step back from the front lines. I can't convince them to give up their heavy weapons. I can't keep Minsk 1 and 2 in check. What do I do? What's the option? And
How, I know we said we wanted to keep this around an hour, but this I guess like is a good time to bring this up. Um, so Zelensky, right? Really super polarizing figure in this war. Some people are blaming him for the war. Some people are blaming Putin. Some people think Zelensky is like some Churchillian leader who like, you know, like is so goddamn great. Like so like how is he perceived in Ukraine, right? By pro Russians, by you know the because he was Poroshenko's political rival, right? And there's and I know we know his background was he was an actor, he was a comedian, he did Dancing with the Stars. Supposedly he does a lot of cocaine. But like, what's in a nutshell? Who's Zelensky? What influence does he have? And how is he perceived in Ukraine and Russia?
there's a lot of competing theories on this. So remember what I talked about the conflict between Kolomoisky, the oligarch, and Poroshenko?
Yeah,
Well, who funded the show to get Zelensky on a show which represents him as an accidental president, right? Seeding that idea into people's minds, right? It's
that
not an accident.
servant of
It,
the people.
it's deliberate, right? And who funds that show and who gets that organized? Kolomoisky. And who did Zelensky oppose and have trouble with? Poroshenko. You see how
Poroshenko, yeah.
this is all yeah, you see how this is all connecting. So that's the thing. Zelensky comes in on a lot of promises because the internal situation of Ukraine, it's in a civil war. It's not good, and there's not this aid, Western aid coming in as we see now back then. And it is having a COVID crisis, it's having all these issues, it's having a lot of people are emigrating, a lot of people are leaving. You can see this on population UN data. It's losing, it's having brain drain problems, which each Eastern European country has, but especially, and that's probably the issue that kills nations the most. So it's going through crisis, and Zelensky he has mixed messages because he's not a politician, he's not a career politician, he's an actor, right? And he's able to be an actor really well. So, but he presents mixed messages at different times, and it's convenient. You know, I think that when he went to the front lines, it changed his view on things. He realizes that he can't control, he doesn't have full control of the country, and like he's not going to be able to like do peace necessarily. And he has his own incentives, right? He's in a very precarious. Ukraine's not a stable country. He can get assassinated. He can get, you know, there's rival groups. There's always political assassinations happening. It's an unstable country. It's in the middle of civil war. So that's the thing. I think he's not everyone supports him in Ukraine. There's people who, even though they fight with under the government, they're doing that because they know they have to stay unified
Because I
because the
yeah,
fight.
because Poroshenko was on the news in one segment where he was talking about like you know, well you know I disagree with Zelensky on a lot of things, but we're all in this together against Russia. We're all
Yeah.
Ukrainian. He's going
Remember, a
on about
common enemy, like a common enemy, always suddenly unites people.
right
You know,
the enemy of my
yeah,
enemy is my
yeah.
friend or whatever. Yeah,
So, so there is like ample evidence that like there's I don't know if you saw that elevator video of like Ukrainians in Kiev and like someone puts up a poster of Zelensky and like there's a lot of people who's like, oh fuck this guy's an idiot, this guy's a moron, like because some people want Zelensky to like call off the war and some people want him to go harder, right?
right. You
So
have
there's
but
there's
it's the
all
same. But you have the same on the on the opposing side, right? Like you have
Yeah, you
people in
do.
Russia who are
You do.
saying Putin should step down, right? What was it, like 18 like
Yeah, yeah.
provincial governors or
And then you
something
have Strelkov,
that.
the guy that led the first counter revolution. You have him saying that all the time since 2014. I studied an article.
But
Um,
You got Kadyrov saying like, Putin, what are you doing? Like, you need to escalate this.
yeah, yeah.
Ukraine should be a crater by now.
Yeah, it's so not both of these cabinets, both of these leaderships, they're not a monolith, right? That's what people have to understand, right? They're not fully unified, and there's fissures, there's cracks. So that's the thing with Zelensky. We could, I mean, to go deeper into him, like I think it's really weird how he came to power, and I think it's orchestrated by like Kolomoisky, specifically to target like Poroshenko and seize more power because there's previous like significant rifts with them, like I explained previously. So that's the thing. And then you have Western, like there's competing theories that hey, British intelligence actually they want Zelensky, and Poroshenko's more American intelligence, right? And the UK does not exactly have the same intentions when it comes to America, right? Because America is way further away. It's way more disconnected from what happens in Ukraine. UK is actually much closer. UK is much more dependent on European affairs. So there's competing theories. Like remember, these organizations are not monoliths. There's different opinions, there's different takes, and there's competing interests. Even though they're united under war front. I mean, you saw this in World War II, right? You saw different factions.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, like it's kind of like we were talking about before we got started. How like yeah, like yeah, the Soviet Union, like they knew they had to obviously stop the German advance, but like it's like what is a Russian, right? Like you have Georgians, you have Chechens, you have Kazakhs, you have all kinds of countries that border Russia, and other than like the United States, they probably have like in Russia, like probably the most a very ethnically diverse place, and there's probably some infighting until like the Germans were at the door, and they're like, oh shit, we got to like put that aside and like get these guys out of here.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, so that's the problem. But so going back to like the ATO period, post this is the agreement that's signed is Minsk too. And Minsk too, it's an agreement to like stop hostilities. We're gonna limit the amount of heavy equipment on each side. We're gonna limit shelling, and this is all overseen by a neutral party, which actually was discovered to not be so neutral. It's like the OSCE. It's like the European Organization for like limiting like conflict and stuff. You've seen them,
I've heard of the Minsk agreement before, and
yeah.
both sides accuse the other of violating it. Now, Minsk, we're talking about Minsk in Belarus, right?
Yes, but both sides did violate it. It is true. It was never. Both sides will tell you that it was never a tenable agreement. It was like fairy tale, right? It was the most optimistic. It's like, hey, we can really do peace, and that was never the case, man. It was because both the pro-Russian side and both the pro-Ukrainian side, they want to expand. They want to expand into each other territories, like right. They both have like an intention, like, well, I got to take this back, and it's like, oh, actually, we got to take more because we have pro-Russians over there. So that's the thing is both sides are violating this. The UN will show you that at the last like 5 years that Ukrainians were violating this much more. That they were firing much more artillery into the other area, but both sides are violating this, and both sides will tell. Like Strelkov, he said when it got signed, he said, "Oh, this is a betrayal by the Kremlin. They're cucking out. This is not going to work. The Ukrainians will come for us. This is stupid." And the Ukrainians, there's a lot of nationalist groups. They're like this is stupid. Zelensky or Poroshenko's cucking out. This is not going to work. We need to keep up the fight. So on both sides, there's bad actors, or I don't know if there's agitating actors that don't want the Minsk agreement, right? And if they outnumber,
Both sides who aren't going to back down. They're just like
yes, exactly.
any way you look at it, yeah, it's that's the
Yeah.
hard thing about having peace anywhere is
Yep.
you're gonna have you might even have a majority who are like down with it, but you're always gonna have the people who are like who will see it as like, well, we're not gonna be the
Yeah.
back down, and then the
Exactly.
fighting just perpetuates.
That's kind of what's going on during this time. It's not a huge like I mean you probably you have more people dying with Chicago from homicide than some months in these areas. Like it'll be like 127 people some years or something. Like Yeah, that's significant, but still, I mean, look at Chicago, right? You'll have like
Right.
3,000
Or
murders or
even
something.
worse, like somewhere like Caracas, Venezuela,
Yeah,
where you can
yeah,
just get like shot walking down the street for no
yep,
reason.
exactly.
Yep.
So is maybe Minsk is kind of worked slightly at the time, it at least held up back violence for some time. So that's the thing. But behind the scenes, really, what I think is both sides know this is not going to hold up, and both sides are training for this. And to understand what's going on now, especially with the Kharkiv offensive, like that's why I'm really emphasizing the ATO. Well, what was the Ukrainian military doing? It knew this is like the silver lining to losing is you learn from your mistakes. You're forced to learn, and that's once Ukraine lost this first Donbass war, fighting the pro-Russian opposition, is they went back to the drawing board. They went to NATO. NATO trained. NATO equipped.
And
Not fully equipped.
you start to learn your enemy's tactics too. And
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how much this is, because this is like, I think this is, again, like, maybe we'll save this for part two, but like this is really the first, like, yeah, there was Iraq, there was Afghanistan, but this is the first, like, which were more, I would consider, they were wars, but they were more of a series of insurgencies and skirmishes. This is the first like large scale war in Europe since World War II, and we're
And the
finding that, like,
Balkans.
that tactics have shifted so heavily, because like Russia has the largest tank fleet in the world, and what did we give Ukraine a ton of in the beginning of this war? NLAWs, javelins, anti tank, advanced anti tank weapons. What did Germany give them? The Panzerschreck threes. So like, where like in the past, you needed artillery or another tank to kill a tank. Now a group of three guys on the ground, who can hide in the bushes, can do it. It just you couldn't do that in
No.
World War II. So that was like kind of an adaptation there, because we, like, NATO kind of knew that like Russia is a heavily tank based military, or at least that's how they were the
Yeah.
last time we saw them fight.
Well, in World War II, it's true. For most of World War II, it wasn't a case. But remember when the Soviet Union started making major offensive in 1944, 1945, the Volkssturm, what were they equipped with? They were equipped with cheap rocket launch, disposable rocket launchers in mass, Germany produced, because they knew the Soviets have a tank advantage. And this is actually repeated now. We have a tank disadvantage, so we're going to get armed a lot of people with anti. So it's been actually done by Nazi Germany before. They had the Volkssturm, and they gave them a lot of rocket launchers to fight off the Soviet tank army that was encroaching. So, except this time the technology is much different, much more effective
Right, because
in
like
favor of
obviously
in favor of.
the new weapons, kind of like calculate the trajectory for you, and like the RPGs and rockets of the days of old were kind of like they spiraled in like this erratic fashion and would backfire more often. Like they were not as
Yeah,
nearly as reliable, and not so yeah. And then like drones are a whole topic for another day. Drones,
yeah,
UAVs,
yeah, yeah.
and then of course probably the biggest weapon of this war that didn't exist previously. And this is, again, definitely a topic for part two, because we'll go down that wormhole. But social media.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, social media and Donbass played actually a big role. You know how the loser or people learn from the conflict. So a lot of these guys who were fighting on the pro-Russian side and even the pro-Ukrainian side, a lot of them fought in the Chechen wars, right? More so on the pro-Russian side, and so they remember what the Chechens did to demoralize Russian troops. Is like make videos of like capture troops and like, hey mom, I want to go home. So they would capture Ukrainian troops and make them do the same thing, right? They were like, hey mom, I want to go home, and they make tons of music videos, like crazy. I'd say the propaganda war, like the Donbass militias were doing really well with it because you
The
had
the
guys like Motorola. You had Motorola and Kiwi, which were like celebrities. They were fighting on the front. They were commanders who fought long their troops, and there's like those that video of I'm not sure if you've seen it. He's smoking a cigarette, and there's a mortar attack, and he doesn't care. Like everyone runs inside, and he doesn't care. And it's stuff like that that builds like this heroic image and makes people pay attention to the war. Like it becomes like almost like a movie, like these main characters that you want to like cheer on. And if you notice on the pro Russian side, it doesn't exist anymore. Really, we don't know like any prolific fighters or commanders. Really, there's like no faces to them. But the Donbass war was much different. You had Kivi Motorola, these frontline commanders that were appearing in all these photos, fighting on the front line. You had Mozgov and Shelikov. all these guys that were always doing media ops. They were always informing their populations on what's going on. And the Ukrainians learned from this. They're like, hey, we need that, and now they have that. So that's the thing: is the Ukrainians effectively learned from their mistakes in the Donbass wars leading up, and they did almost transform their military to be much more effective. You see it with like units like Azov. You see it with the Marine Corps. Like remember Aslin? He's a British volunteer. Kostik Gundy. He fought with the Ukrainian Marines inside of Mariupol.
Yeah, and he was captured, and he was saying, and then right. So, so that was a thing that I actually saw months ago because Speak the Truth showed us the footage of that, and it's like with that with social media, and I think this is probably gonna be the last topic for tonight if you're cool with that, but
Yeah.
with social media is you can paint a picture anyway, right? Because I'm like I put how they captured him, and he was saying, well, we're in the wrong. Russia's the good guys, and of course I'm thinking, well, how do I know he's not just saying that because they have a gun to his head? But it's the same thing
Yeah.
when Ukraine shows Russian soldiers said we were just told that this was a training exercise and we didn't know what we were doing, and we're in the wrong, and like
Yeah.
everyone should stop sending more.
Exactly.
But I'm like,
That's
but
the
again,
way we
like
have to look
it's
at
like
it.
if I point a gun at their heads, right, they'd say anything.
Especially if you're shooting people know that you're shooting POWs, you're threatening to like castrate them. Like there's all this bad blood between people. Like you're gonna want to save your life. So a lot of people are gonna say anything. And so the I won't say like where you flipped, and like I don't know if that's genuine or not. We can never know, unfortunately, unless like we go there and like he's still alive. So unless we like once he gets out, if he still has the same opinion or not, whatever he says. Um, the thing is, I'll say what neutrally he said that doesn't like it doesn't matter if you got. He just said, hey, we train with NATO all the time, and that's true. That's not a hidden fact by the Ukrainian side. Is he said, hey, there was always like American Marines, like European, like different, and they were training us like all the time. It was constant, and they would come in, they would inspire us, they'd be really professional. We would want to emulate them. So it was like this 8 years past the Donbass conflict. Not only is Ukraine getting combat experience for hundreds of thousands of troops because you're rotating a lot of people, NATO training with tens of thousands of troops with brigade like every year, like 3, 4 brigades training with new 3 brigades like with NATO. They're getting new equipment and they're still active combat. So by the end of this, you have to realize it really becomes the most experienced army in the world. It's not the United States because the United States we're fighting insurgents and we're not fighting that with many troops, right? We're not having hundreds of thousands of troops that are rotating in and out at this point for the last 10 years. It's more like maybe 10,000, 12,000 that are fighting limited insurgencies. They're not fighting every day. Most of the time they're doing something with the locals. They're doing some support mission with the Afghan army. The Ukrainians are actually they're they're uh, they're in active combat the whole time. That's just the reality of it. It may be slim, but still, artillery units are firing and they're getting hit by
Combat's combat, and you
combat, and you're
responding to
getting
you
combat experience. You're
you
getting combat
responding
experience.
to
Yeah,
a target that actually fires back.
but yeah,
Even one two
yeah,
times, that's more valuable than spending every day at the range,
but
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because you don't know how you're going to react to that situation until you're there.
exactly. But the Ukrainians know, and this is why you see Ukrainians like in Lysychansk and all these. That's why the Russian army has to grind away these positions, and you see Ukrainian troops. They're getting shelled, they're getting hit in these trenches, they're getting hit by artillery, and there's little reaction from them. They're like, okay, this is fine. Like they're used to it. That's the thing. They have combat experience doing this. They've been doing it for 8 years. They fought a whole war doing that. So that's a big effect. So by pre-starting February 24th, when the special military operation so-called launches, is what does Ukraine have? A very heavily equipped NATO force. Like a lot of U.S. commentators will tell you, like the amount of rocket launchers they have per like infantry unit is it's like multiples more than what America have. The matter because so many people are saturated. All these countries are sending tens of thousands of rocket launchers. So each like instead of like 1 in 12 infantrymen having a rocket launcher, now it's like 6 out of 12. So it's very capable. It's very capable.
Right.
And And also what the Ukrainian military is doing is, let's say I know you're coming to kill me in 8 years. What am I going to do? And I know that you're going to come through. So what do I do is I get a gun, I get it like a bipod, and I start training at that distance. I start zeroing my sight at like 100 meters. Like, oh, J-Top is going to be 100 meters. He's going to come with a knife. He's going to come this way or this way. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. They're logically saying, hey, Russia, if they're going to invade us, and a lot of them think that they do. So I know Zelensky actually didn't think that, and he said, calm down. They're probably not going to invade us. A lot of Ukrainians said, yeah, no, they probably will, because they actually participated by doing the cross-border artillery strikes. And there's, Strelokov said, the army might come before. So there's always this fear that the Russian army is going to intervene at any time. You have to be prepared. So what do? Is they all over the Donetsk front. They start building concrete barriers, concrete. I don't know if you've seen some of these, like very very intricate concrete bunkers and concrete it's kind of like the Maginot Line that France had, because it's not just one bunker, it's like a whole tunnel that's concrete.
It's like
And
it's like almost a Berlin Wall, but not.
yeah, yeah, and multiple areas along. It's very, and a lot of these towns, they're completely depopulated. Like Pesky, you see, so I showed you a video. It's complete like all the houses are destroyed, and what's left is like the basements. And a lot of the basements, they connect those basements with like the tunnels. And there's militias that during the offensive that happened recently, a couple months before, they were taking bunkers of the Ukrainians. They were advancing slightly on the Donetsk front, like the Donbass front, and they were showing off these, like, they're like, wow, the Ukrainians were living in luxury conditions, because compared to our like fortifications, which are like super basic, these guys had air conditioning. These guys had like gas heating, and like the protection super like were well made. Like these bunkers were really really well made. So that's the thing, is not only is Ukraine learning how to do artillery, they're learning how to take fire, maneuver, use NATO weapon, integrate Soviet and NATO weaponry, and getting training all the time. They're also entrenching, and right, if you're gonna be defending, what's the most important factor? It's entrenchment, right? There's like low level entrenchment where like you could just hide behind bushes, you concealment, and then you actually build cover. Like you start building like mud or sand, you put sandbags. And then like there's like the ultimate level where you're doing concrete, where you're doing life support systems, like the gas heating, the air conditioning. Like so they were making the highest tier of entrenchment you can have along the Donbass front, right? And it's very effective. Your troops are well protected there. They can keep taking artillery shells. There was, remember, and they had 8 years to stock all these bunkers with equipment. There's tons of equipment being stocked there, stocked there, stocked. There's troops being rotated out. All these troops are learning how to navigate these bunkers, how to fire out of them, what like range to fire.
Right, like I'm sure they the Azovstal steelworks, all those tunnels under it,
Yeah,
even though that's not it's below, but still, I'm sure those guys, that was all like mapped out for
yep,
them if that
yeah,
situation were to arise. I'm sure they knew that at some point that
yes,
was going to be the case. But I do think we're it's getting late here, so I think
yeah.
we'll kind of go to closing thoughts. But I do think we should do this again, because we've kind of just
Yeah, we'll
scratched the
do a part
surface,
two.
really.
Maybe part two and part three, because this is like, unfortunately, like so much of this is glossed over. Like you
Yeah, well,
wonder, like people like, whoa, Ukrainian military having successes, like, and it's all due to US gear. I think that's the most bullshit thing. I honestly think, and I think it's very hard to argue against this. They were the most prepared military, the most combat experience with a peer-to-peer, and Russia did not have this. Russian troops, what were they doing in Syria? Syria was a limited operation. They're not like storming cities exactly. They're just doing air operations, special forces. Their main army is not engaging in any active combat. The Ukrainian army is, and they're not. And the Russians are not building fortifications, at least not to the level the Ukrainians are. And now people wonder, like Kharkiv offensive, Russia can't do an offensive like that, but Ukrainians can. Well, why is that, right? You look at the disparities between entrenchment, and the Ukrainians just have such better bunkers, such better life support systems, such better firing points. And one last topic is, is like I talked about. Like I know, like you're coming for me, and I have 8 years to prepare. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna sight in a rifle to like fire at the point where I can engage you, like 100, let's say 200 meters. So I'm gonna zero my scope. You've done this before at the range. Is like I'm gonna zero my scope to 200 meters, so I can hit, so I know where to hit you. You know, that's what the Ukrainians were doing because logically they know the roads are only at certain points. The Russians are gonna come with their BTGs, so it's gonna be heavily motorized, and this is how we're gonna hit them. We know how to hit them. We've hit the Nets militias before, so we know how to fire. And that's why they also fire many times, break into a mist regime because they're practicing like situations like what if there was an offensive with Russian troops coming out of the Nets? This is where we're gonna hit. So when you're training and you set up these guns, they're already sighted in. Like so, all you don't have to like figure out trajectory. You don't like artillery is very hard work. Like a lot of math goes into it. But if you have 8 years to prepare and you know where the enemy's coming from, you can prepare that in advance. So what the enemy has to do, they have to like come in, stage their guns, get their crews ready, and then start firing and start correcting for the firing, right? But you can already fire. You already know where they're going to be. You already know where they're going to be. So you just have to fire. You have so much advantage, and you see this in this war too. When Russia started moving its artillery in, it was getting hit without any response from their side because it has to get it in range. It has to correct it, but the Ukrainians already have this very practice with this. So that's the thing is sighting in your artillery. For the Ukrainians, they already have practice sighting it in, and they're ready for a Russian offensive. So that's my I guess last point before we end up the show.
Okay. Yeah. So, no, that's again. We're just kind of scratching the surface here. I know we said we were gonna do questions. So, I mean, I just see a bunch of trolling in the chat, to be honest. But if anybody actually has a legitimate like question, drop it now because I'm probably gonna end this in like 5 minutes. But so I guess in the next time, I kind of want to talk more about the actual logistics and battles of this of this war, and what is the United States motive to to push Ukraine as the good guy and make them win.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into more, like, because people want to know what's going on now. But there's one more conflict we have to cover because we covered what did we cover today? We covered the prelude to the Maidan, like, and then the Maidan and the fighting with Strelokov, Moscow, all these people, all these figures in the first Donbass war, and then you have the ATO anti-terror operation, kind of the limited war. And there's one more war we have to cover to really understand this conflict, and that's Nagorno-Karabakh. That's a region that's disputed between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and they fought a war after the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s. And the Armenians, despite their lower manpower and less equipment, they won that conflict. And now we see that conflict actually flaring up right now due to what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that, and they're right.
Yeah, it's a lot of what
They're actually
commentators
attacking
miss.
Armenia.
It's a lot of commentators, like, they don't mention this war at all, even though that war is the most important part to understanding what's going on now is Nagorno Karabakh. Donbass, I say it's number two, is a very close second, but Nagorno Karabakh is more recent. Remember, it was 2020, right? And those are very similar forces to what we're seeing fighting here. It's maybe slight differences, but they're fighting with roughly the same gear. Yeah, so that's the thing, and it's flaring up again. And these events are very connected to Ukraine, and Ukraine develops a strategy based on what it sees in Nagorno Karabakh, and we will talk about that in the next episode.
Yep.
And what here's one thing I'll say.
That hang on, there was an actual legitimate question here that I wanted to go to. So unironical spiteful unironical spiteful mutant says question, who would y'all recommend to follow for the war YouTube channels and Twitters? I'll let you go first.
I'd say
You have a lot.
I'd say military summary, and then there's also military summary for day to day because he shows both the pro-Ukraine maps and pro-Russian maps, and he shows like what's going on day to day. The type of
Yeah, I've
military
seen him.
summary.
He's very good.
Yeah, and then there's also history legends. Like it's more animated, so it's easier to watch. And he's like, it's actually pretty.
That's
He
funny. So
show
you're listing sources that like I've watched like probably a good amount of hours of.
Yeah. And then if you type in, you're mostly gonna likely you're just gonna run into pro-Ukraine sources if you go blindly in. That's just the fact. So like that's easy. It's easy to find pro-Ukraine sources, but I'll tell you some sources that are like in the middle or more adjacent to the pro-Russian side. Is I think Patrick Lancaster is actually very good because what did he do before this war? He went to Nagorno Karabakh, and if you want to understand what's going on now and why the things are developing as they are now, you have to watch Nagorno Karabakh, and that's where he worked. He was with Armenian soldiers a lot of the times. And then there's another guy, Graham Phillips. He's embedded with the Donetsk militias. He's a British guy, pro-Russian views, and he'll show you a lot about Mariupol. And he's been in Donetsk for like so long, since like 2014. And then I do like Gonzalo Lira, and I do trust him honestly more because I I don't know if you saw them during his coach Red Pill days, but he didn't like care about that. He didn't even know about that conflict. The reason he has his views is because he talks to locals in Kharkiv, so he gets like his like views
I
from
know
them
he moved
specifically.
to Ukraine because he kept talking about escaping the West and all that. I mean, I didn't
Well,
watch too much of him as
yeah,
Coach Red Pill. I know that okay, so here's the thing. I do question his some of his credibility, Coach Red Pill, because a lot of the black pillars point up like he's and I hate to even like keep like giving this the time of day, right? But he's like he's clearly like a not good looking dude, and he was making these claims he was dating models and like without any proof. So I'm like and right, that has nothing to do
yeah,
obviously with the war or anything, but I look at it as like like a person's credibility, right? If they're making like claims that they should have at least some proof of and don't have anything, like I'm like I don't know how credible I find that person. I'll just be honest with you on
yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, I mean, the value is not what he specifically says because he's not a military expert. He was
Because
in
he is
Kiev.
there. He is there.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's
and he was also in Kiev when the fighting broke out. Like he filmed from there, and he had to go back to Kharkiv. The reason why he's in Ukraine because he met a woman in. That's what at least what he says. I don't know how we can verify this, but he met a woman in Germany and she was from Kharkov, and that's he moved there, and formed a relationship with her, whatever. So that's the thing, and he's still stuck there. And the thing is, he tells you when the power is out. He tells you like, hey, the power was out today from this and that. This was affected. The trains were affected. He tells you like,
he's telling he's giving
yeah,
you an account of what's happening on the
yeah,
ground where he
yeah. But
is.
he has this certain opinions that like, and I think he was influenced by like his wife and the locals. Like, and he's like, oh, okay, I'll take what you guys are saying.
How does
Yeah,
just one question? How does he have a wife? Isn't he sub 5?
yeah. But I
I'm
mean,
just,
some women, they.
yeah,
We won't get
no.
into that.
I'm saying like that. That's because that CRP is like a whole. And again, and we won't go into this tonight.
Yeah.
But it's like when you're debating like the legitimacy of like the whole like lookism. It's like okay,
Take
like yeah, okay.
everything with a grain of salt.
Is it right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's
No,
a credible source when it
yeah,
comes to the war, but he's not a credible source when it comes to how to
yeah.
coach people through like getting
Well, we
over.
don't know. We don't know if he. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know if he's a
Well, that's
credible
what I'm
source
saying.
on the
Like
war, but we
I
know
don't
he's on
believe
the
I don't
and we yeah
I personally don't believe his claims that he dated models in the past, but
yeah
it could be.
yeah
Who knows?
yeah.
But
It just if you follow him, it's his interviews. Like he'll interview history legends. He'll interview a military summary, and they'll all talk together. And they'll talk about you get some people that are neutral or pro-Russian, not really a lot of pro-Ukrainian. I don't think at all. But actually, in his shows, there's a lot of stuff that's revealed that like actually like there what his show showed because military summit like actually Ukraine doesn't have low morale. They have actually high morale. And they were like discussing that. So like those topics get brought up because honestly, well, I have my own opinions. I have my own kind of view on it and I follow like either neutral or pro-Russian sources, pro-Ukrainian. I honestly, I have my opinion. I think Lockheed Martin has like something to do with NATO and over like emphasizing the HIMARS really. Like they haven't. I mean, this is $1 trillion industry, so you're gonna get
yeah,
people that have an incentive.
you gotta advertise your product
This is
as
yeah, and as a result, Poland's buying 500 HIMARS, right? But I say, and then New Atlas, I think he has like good logical arguments for like pieces of equipment. He has military experience, and he has his own views. So
There's
New
there's
Atlantic,
one there's one I want to plug too, and that's Speak the Truth. Because he
yeah,
does
yeah,
tend
you
to
sent me
come
that
off a
one.
little pro. He does tend to come off a little pro Ukraine NATO, but like he has been pretty objective. Like he does show Russian state TV, and again he could just be clipping it out of context, but he does show you what they're saying, and he has actually like admitted it when Ukraine lost some battles very badly. Like he's just like, I'm just telling you what's happening here, like with Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. He's like, yeah, he's like, the Ukrainians they're encircled from three sides. They're not going to be able to keep this up. They're going to have to retreat, or they're going to just get killed. I mean, it is what it is. So he was honest about. He wasn't trying to like spin that a certain way. He's just like, they're straight up getting gunned down. So like
Yeah,
I do trust him. Like he's like admitted to he does seem a bit, because he's a former U.S. combat vet, so naturally he's going to be like pro NATO, but he does, and he talks about how before he updates his map on who controls what territory, he gets multiple verification from both sources, via both telegram groups, and tries to piece it together. Like he'll say, this area
yeah,
is contested right now, and I'm not going to update it until I have more proof, of who's really in control of this territory right now. So right now, this is contested.
yeah. Who knows? Maybe we should start doing that shit because there's so much fog of war. It's
Well,
kind of
that but
insane.
that but that's my whole point. Do you remember what we were talking about? And I know I troll the Discord or whatever, but like that when we were talking about Mariupol, and I'm like, okay, well, hey, I'm gonna actually like verify that this is actually real, and
Yep.
not just like this city could be anywhere. And I actually went on Google Earth and put it on satellite view and started scanning Mariupol block by block until I found that apartment complex
Yeah.
with the same
Yeah.
building across the street. But like you obviously can't, nobody has time or the energy to
Yeah.
do that with every piece, but like that's unfortunately, that's like the level of like scrutiny we have to like apply to like
Yep. It's
everything,
true.
thanks to social media. And the most exhausting chore is like actually
Yeah.
verifying accuracy. That it's
Yeah.
honestly like, I can see why people just want to be apolitical sometimes and like just
I
not.
think in this conflict from both sides, honestly, there's from both sides. There's more misinformation than there is
Yeah,
correct information. Because I've the more time I've spent, the more time, like I mean, you've kind of seen what I post and everything. And like the side I'm on now is like the Russian doomer. Is I honestly think Russia at this point, unless something changes, they're losing the war, and they're losing it significantly. And I think the a lot of this is not YouTube channels. Military Summary, like he totally admits, like he's really good about that. And I do recommend some of the Gonzalo Lira interviews. A lot of stuff gets revealed there. There's stuff like Gray Zone and like the Duran. They're more pro-Russian, but they're starting to ask questions like, "What the fuck's going on?" And um, and then there's also these journalists, Patrick Lancaster. I say for most of the things he's done a good job. And then Philip Graham and Philip, they're going to be pro-Russian views because they're in those areas. They're influenced by the locals, so they come with like more neutral, and then they get polarized.
I have
But
I
they,
have seen some of his content too.
yeah,
I've tried to, it's again, that's like the hard part too. You get like a video, and then you gotta like find time to like watch the whole thing, because you watch like
yeah,
clips of it, and you're watching it in like 10-minute segments, and it's you gotta like go back. So
yeah,
that's a whole
yeah,
thing too. And
yeah. Like, yeah,
go
yeah.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I'd say the best Twitter account that I honestly like is Ghost of Zeppo. Type that in because it's pro-Russian adjacent, but what he's spending more time now is he's like fighting with the pro-Russian like sphere. The pro-Russian sphere, the Russophile sphere, is actually like in a civil war right now because what we have, honestly, I think is it's really insane. Like we would have to do a whole episode on this because you have so much like insane misinformation, and it's not coming from the Kremlin. I don't. I think you have like people like Serbian nationalists that have like an axe to grind with like NATO from 30 years ago, and they're like saying like a really, I mean, we have this in our own Discord, right? It's like undeniable, like no, 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 like you're just like a doomer.
Yeah, yeah,
Russia will
you're
win.
the people that I when I'm trolling. I was trolling earlier. I'm like, yeah, and Vladimirovich Putin will be proclaimed a god, and the
Yeah.
East shall rule, and yeah, that it's just
Like
like
there's
this. I
there's
think
a lot
some
of problem
people
there's a
like
lot of
are.
problem accounts. I just like that's the thing is I like if you're gonna be pro-Russian, that's fine. But dude, like you've
You gotta,
misled
you
your own
gotta, you gotta.
you
On either side, you have to be realistic,
you have to be
and I
sober.
will
And I
admit, like I have bias. Okay, I mean, I was
yeah,
born at the end of the height of the Cold War. Okay, so like you have to remember, like everything, at that time was kind of like, oh, like oh yeah, America's, the best, and the Soviets collapsed, and we're, so great, and again, like again, like I guess to some people it came off as like cocky or whatever, but I kind of I was told
yeah,
when this all started that this may be a long, protracted, drawn out conflict, but
yes,
there is at the end of it all, Russia made a mistake and will be weaker for it in the
yeah,
long run.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's still the tides have changed. There's sort of like one side will have a momentum, right, until it gets hit,
Yep.
and then it reverses course. And there's a particular side right now, Ukraine, that it's picked up the momentum. It has the momentum, it has the initiative, and that's just a fact. And honestly, I gotta say, I've really kind of changed who I trust with this because there's a lot of like, and this comes not from like necessarily pro-Russian. They're not necessarily pro-Russian. They're just anti-Western, right? So they don't really have they're not so supportive of Russia, but they have like what this crowd I would call is like the alt media. They're multipolar, so they want to see a multipolar like when the Soviet Union was around because and they have a pretty good argument. They say, hey, it's better for the working class because when there's a like agitator like the Soviet Union, like it presents a competing model, and so people here have to treat their workers better because like hey, they might come over here one day and like they might support a workers' revolution, for example, and that's actually legitimate. That's why that's a significant reason why America in the past, like people could afford to buy a home with one income and everything, and why workers did have extraordinary benefits and everything, because you did have this threat and the organized threat in the East that was like very pro worker and this, it was a competing idea, right? And at the fall, you do have a unipolar world or unipolar world order. That's just the default. It's American led, right? And there's no one to challenge it right now. And these people they want a challenge to it because they're what are they called? They're demoralized or they're what was it called? Alienated labor, disenfranchised.
Yeah.
So they're white.
Well,
They're actually Western
and
people.
it will
So yeah.
happen one day. All empires do come to an end. It will happen one day.
Mm.
I would wager a lot of money that it's not we're not going to
In
see
our,
it in our lifetime, but it will. I
yeah.
mean, it will eventually happen. I just don't think
Especially if the worst case scenario for the Russians is true. You've just extended the multi. If the Russians lose this, they just extended the multipolar world for like by 50 years, or the like they just their loss just shows that how powerful America and they say it's a crumbling empire, and there's very good evidence for that. But if this crumbling empire is still able to beat back its competition, then it's still on fucking top, no matter what. So that's the thing is you a lot of like there's a lot of like misinformation and like people think it comes from the Kremlin and it really doesn't because they don't run these like really good operations. They're like lagging behind. They're like a bunch of boomers and they
Yeah,
say
there's
a lot of
this
stupid
new
shit.
shit like that you always hear about Russian hackers, Russian troll farms, Russian misinformation, but I'm like, I don't even think they're as good as at the information war as NATO is. Like when it
Not
comes
even
to
close.
trolling, everybody
Not
says
even
that
close.
like like they
But the
had us
misinformation,
believing a
I'll
lot of
tell you, I
things, but
figured out where the misinformation is coming from, like from the because I would be in his Twitter spaces. I that's what I've been doing. Like people ask like where you been. I've been like in these Twitter spaces with like I've been talking to some Russian people, some Ukrainians. I've been talking to like these like there would be like a pro-Russian space basically it's like hey it's anti-NATO I'd say more so than pro-Russia, and they're the ones that are spreading the most illusion. Like I'll mention specific tags like next episode or maybe the third episode honestly, because honestly that's what's like really causing a lot of issues and a lot of people to be shocked by like Ukraine's successes. Because basically, me and like a good friend of mine who actually is Ukrainian, we've been going to like pro-Russian spaces and we've been saying like, guys, the message you're spreading, it's not rosy at all. Like we're on the way to defeat. We were saying 3 months ago, like, dude, look at the like this is you can't do this operation with 200,000 troops. This is not going to work. Ukraine's mobilizing, it's mobile, and some of these people would say, "Oh, Ukrainians are out of gas, or Ukrainians are low morale. The equipment is failing." I'm like, "No, it's not, dude. You guys are insane." So there's insane cope. There's insane cope in a lot of pro-Russian spaces, but right now it's splitting. It's splitting apart to like the people who like Sherlockov, who called us out. He said that from the beginning this is going to be a failure in the way it's conducted. And it's right now the pro-Russian sphere, the Russophile, the multipolar sphere, they're splitting apart. There's like a mini civil war because of the recent Kharkiv offensive. People sobering up, and some people what they instead of sobering up, they get more entrenched in their ideas. Like the more you challenge, they say no, no, no. Like they'll start calling me like a Ukrainian spy or something. They'll go insane.
Yeah,
It's
like
insane to see.
you'll have people you have the people. I was watching was I think his name is Hal Sparks, and he was talking about this guy named Jimmy Dore, who was talking about how like the retreat, as the Russian defense minister called it, was like a strategic pullback. And
Yeah,
it's like
right.
that's such a cope because in a strategic pullback, you don't leave weapons and ammunition for like your enemies to take
Yep.
and use against you.
Yep.
Like if they and what he said, I forget. Oh, it was Speak the Truth who talked about this on his channel. He's like, as a combat vet, he's a guy. He's like, they found uneaten food, half-eaten food. He's like when you're in control of a retreat and you're
Exactly.
just leaving, you obviously the troops like eat first. They don't just leave. I'm like, if you find half-eaten food, they abandoned it. They ran.
Yeah, and then you have like these outrageous claims like Kherson, yeah, I 4,000 casualties. That's probably true on
That's
the
probably
Ukrainian
true.
side.
And
But
that's
but on Kharkiv,
yeah.
what happened? What did the Russian Ministry of Defense say as soon as the Kharkiv front? They said, "Oh, we lost this area, but we caused 4,000 casualties and 8,000 injured on the Ukraine side." I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because when those numbers come out, like 4,000, you could at least see part of that, right? You couldn't see this. You see like in Kherson front, you see like huge like waves of Ukraine troops getting mauled by artillery, but you never saw that in Kharkiv. You saw the opposite. You saw Russian equipment mostly getting captured. Yeah,
They broke
yeah.
through the front lines. Like
Yeah,
the first day of the
exactly.
Kherson offensive was horrendous for Ukraine, and
Yeah.
I think that like they realistically know they're gonna have a high attrition down there because like I think too that like the some people say that like the Kherson offensive, like I don't think it was a trick. I do think they're actually trying to take that territory,
Yes, they
but
are.
they highly concentrated there to get Russia to like concentrate more on that and like like have more sparse lines at Kharkiv so that they could and then it was what they did was they funneled troops into Kharkiv and like were really quiet about it on social media, and they had them come in like wearing civilian clothes and then change into their fatigues and then just rush the basically like someone gave a signal and then they all got into vehicles and rushed the front lines because they knew that Russia would be caught off guard. But like that's what you
Mhm.
have to do now. You have to like keep it because like if anybody says something on social media, there goes your whole operation. It's done.
I'll actually tell you about the Kharkiv front. Everyone in the pro-Russian sphere knew about the accumulation. Like I even have a friend, no one. He's on Twitter.
Really.
He on August 31st, he said because we were discussing this, we were like, dude, Izium is actually the real target because Russians fought really hard and it's a
And
very critical
yeah, it's
logistics point.
probably wasn't that their
Yeah,
big logistics hub.
yeah, it was, and they fought very hard for that. And he on August 31st he said this. He said, "Watch, they're gonna come from Kharkov. They're gonna fight there. They're gonna go for Izium." He said, and that's what ended up happening because if you saw it soberly, if you saw it realistically, you saw that
It
Ukraine
was
is
yeah. You were like
they're not just gonna do one offensive. They're gonna do multiple ones at the same time, right? And the question is like a lot of these people on the pro-Russian side, they say, "Oh, it's a part of the plan. It's part of like we knew, like we let them do." No, it's like it's just insane. And
we didn't really want that. Yeah, I heard that's what they were saying on that Hal Sparks thing. They were like, "Well, they
yeah,
didn't really want it." I'm like, Really? Then why were they? If
no,
they didn't
yeah,
want it, why were they there? Why did they have it? Why
yeah.
put up
And and then, and then it's
supply
like
hub there?"
and then it's like, oh, we knew. It's like you know about the grouping there. You know that forces are accumulating. You just don't know how many. Yeah, some are doing this. The civilian clothes thing. I mean, is that a violation of Geneva Convention? That's a question. Maybe not. Maybe yes. but it's a war. You have to fight with
Yeah,
whatever
you
you've got.
right. Well, that is a good
Yeah.
question. I mean, it's like, you take off your uniform
Honestly, in the end of the
when
point, it
you're not
doesn't.
involved in fight. Yeah,
Nobody's like the pro Ukraine media is not, or like the pro Western or the Western media is not going to go and like question that. What matters is who wins in the end. That's like the ultimate thing.
yeah,
Ethics, like it's going to be a war, and like you hear the thing, all's fair in love and war, and it's like so like I'm starting to doubt these people that say, well, Russia's trying to do it like limited and everything, and I'm asking, and you will get crucified in a lot of pro Russian spaces, and I've been banned. I've shown you like all the places I've been banned from just for asking questions. It's like, what if Russia just does not have the military capability to strike these groups? It just doesn't. It can't. Even if it's not like it's not a question of want. It just can't fucking do it, dude. It just doesn't have the. I mean, America ran out of a precision guided missile in Battle of Mosul against ISIS. It ran out of them. If America can run out of them, so can Russia. And then you see a down Su-34. So yes, and what do Su-34s drop? They drop the laser guided missiles on. So they were trying to halt this offensive. They were trying to fight back. It just didn't work out. It's not like they made a choice. No, Ukraine forced them to make a choice to withdraw. If it forced them to break their lines. But that's the thing is there's so much like there's insane cope on both sides, but
yeah.
I have more information on the cope on the pro-Russian side that's just insane, and I'm like this is ridiculous. And at least some people are waking up on that front, but it's like very tough. A lot of, but I gotta tell you, the pro-Russian narrative comes from people living in the West. Like you see these people like Martinov, Smoothie X12. He's like this, expert that served in the Soviet military and a high officer, and he does all these like complex formulations, and it's like. But it's like, why do you live in the United States? If Russia's so good, I know that's like maybe a weird like a not the best argument, but it's like I question why is one of the members who does the podcast Russian with Attitudes, I'm sure you've seen him, why does one of them live in the
I
West?
have. Right,
Yeah,
right, right. Well,
like
that's was my
if the
original
West is so
argument about
bad,
that
if
was my original argument about
yeah,
Gonzalo Lira because he was in Kharkiv and
yeah,
he's like talking about everything. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you're on the Russian side, why are you in Ukraine of all places? But then you kind of gave me an insight on that like
he
he met
can't
that
really
lady in
leave.
Germany and he moved right
He
because they're not gonna if you're
yeah,
coming from Ukraine, Russia's gonna be like that's a little sus. But
yeah,
I think up until that point, I guess he was pro Ukrainian. But because Kharkiv is not that far from Donetsk and
no,
Luhansk.
no,
So like,
no,
I'm sure you know about like what's going on because that's the area before this all started. As you said, there was always like like insurgency going on in that area.
yeah,
So I'm
pro-Russian
sure he
sentiment, yeah.
knew. I'm sure he knew about some of that because Kharkiv Oblast is what like maybe like how many miles away from there is that like less than 100, right?
Yeah, from the Russian border, from like it's there. It's close to Belgrade. Right now, the Ukraine's pushed all the way back to the Russian borders. So yeah,
Right.
it's
Well,
close.
that
But
Belgorod, they've been Ukraine has been attacking Belgorod
yeah,
like from across the border pretty
yeah,
much since the first days of the war. Right. Like
yeah.
they've been like lobbing artillery over the border into
Yep.
Belgorod.
They launched two Tochka U's recently, and one of them hit the city proper. It killed one person, injured four. And then also, on people ask like, "Oh, Russia attacked civilian like electrical infrastructure." It's like,
Oh,
yes,
I know about the blackout in Belgorod and the
yeah,
days that
yeah,
they
yeah,
did the same
yeah.
thing. Yep.
But here's the question. Here's the question. Like what did Putin say? He says denazify and demilitarize. Wait a minute. You failed in both those objectives because now there's more. Honestly, there's more neo Nazis because there's Western neo Nazis who like support. They went into Ukraine. Now they have weapons. Now they're on the Russian border. A lot of them have killed Russian soldiers. A lot of them have terrorized some pro-Russian people. They have training, they have combat experience, and they're at your border. And now Ukraine is outfitted with like $70 billion worth of equipment and weapons and training.
Well,
So you're
that's
failing.
been my thing too. Is we
Yeah,
because the last time we
it's all no, 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 Jay.
we
It's all
armed the
part of the plan.
country.
It's all part of the plan. Like that's the thing. All these people cope. Like all these supposed experts. Except the most important expert, which is Sherlockov, because he's the one that organized the militias. He's fought Ukraine before, and he's the one like because people will tell me like on the pro-Russian side, they're like, "Oh man, you're just this one person, and just listen to the experts, bro." It's like I'm like, wait a minute, why are your experts like
But
Martinov, which is
but there's plenty of experts on the other side too. So either way,
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah,
some experts are going to be wrong. It's like when medical
yeah,
research comes out and some doctors agree and some don't. It's like, okay,
yeah.
well, you
In
listen to
the
experts,
end,
but one of them is going to be wrong.
the most important thing just happened. What's the result on the battlefield? What's the result on the battlefield?
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm just tired of the like,
and when the smoke and it's when the smoke has cleared,
you
not
know,
like, on day one of this. It's like, okay, well, there's still going to be a lot
yeah,
more fighting. It's like, Kerrison, yeah, Ukraine lost a lot of troops on the initial days of it, like probably two to four
yeah,
thousand troops. But it's like, that doesn't mean that like that front is ultimately going to succeed on either
yep,
side. That's not a definitive
yeah,
win for the Russians yet, and it's not like, and it clearly
yep,
showed us that it's not going to be the same as the Kharkiv advance. Like, it's going to be probably a slow slog that takes months and months before we have a decisive winner.
yeah. But to end the show, like we've
Yeah,
been going on close to 2 hours, and thanks for inviting me on, and this was good talking to you. I think we have a lot more to talk about. But I
I
would just
agree.
say is I would ask people is kind of leave your biases. I know it's human to have them. It's really it's not a I wouldn't say it's a fault we all have. It's just a vice, and it's just
We
there, and
all,
it's what
yeah,
human we're all
we
gonna have
have it.
them.
I mean,
But at least get information, and that's what I like about Patrick Lancaster. Despite all his faults, he tells you like don't just view this. Go to the other side and view their reportage too. Try to get us if you're interested in this, right? Don't like actually honestly, I don't think Americans should be paying that much attention anyways to this because we have ongoing issues here. So this which are more important to our own lives. But if you're gonna invest into this conflict and look at it, please like take both sides with a grain of salt because there is more misinformation from both sides than there is real information from both sides. And that's what I've learned. I used to be much more sympathetic to like pro-Russian, like anti-NATO, but now I'm like I'm doubting a lot of it. I'm doubting like and thankfully a lot of people like Zoka, which is a large account pro-Serbian, and he covers the war. And there's like Ghost of Zeppo. I recommend those two accounts. They're pulling away from like the pro-Russian like core, and they're like, hey guys, it's time to be real. It's time to it's time to call out all our mistakes, all the mistakes of the special military operation, and say what do we need to do to improve because we are failing. And there's and like the bulk of people are still like, we're not failing, bro. 40 chess. We're pulling back so we can encircle them. Look at all these casualties been inflicted on them. It's like, okay, what evidence do you have? Just some grainy ass drone footage of like something blowing up in the middle of a forest? Like, come on, man, come on, like 4,000 casualties, my ass, you know. So that's the thing is, I guess that's the conclusion is view it from both sides and take both information from a grain of salt. The truth is somewhere probably in the middle of all this, really, of what's going on.
absolutely. And if you want to, and if you have the time to get it on and actually start verifying things block by block with satellite images for yourself,
Yeah, yeah,
if you're so inclined to do so. But yeah, good stuff tonight. I think we've just scratched the surface, really.
yep,
A lot more to say. I think next time I'd like to talk about, what is the United States motive to support this, to support Ukraine, and the actual battlefield logistics. But first, thanks for coming on, and I think we covered a lot of ground tonight, but a lot more to go. And I'll see you next time.
yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
You got it. Later.
Later.